Yeah, so why do you think Pap doesn't want to get his leg fixed?
Because I think he's had a good life, and I don't know what age he is, but I think he's had a good life, and he's saying to his son, "Oh, you know how to live on your own. You know the places I've told you.
Please stop.
The stuff that I've told you. You know how to shoot. You know how to trap. You know how to do all this stuff."
So Dad feels like, Pap in this feels like, or you're saying Pap feels like he's already taught Moon everything he needs?
Yes.
Which he does mention that quite a bit. It's still hard for me to wrap my mind around to leave a 10-year-old by themselves. But feels like he did prepare him. What's Pap still very afraid of?
That the government is
The
gonna.
government's going to come and get him. So something's up.
And then Moon saying, "Let me go get you help. I can run from the law."
But Pap will hear nothing of it. Pap tells him he can go up to Alaska. Is that reasonable for a 10-year-old to make it from Alabama to Alaska by themselves?
No. Yes.
Like, even Pap, even with Moon knowing what he knows, Alaska is really far away. Like, we see it on a map and it seems so much closer. But if you've ever driven through Alabama or you've driven through like Tennessee to Illinois, if you've ever made those long drives, like you're driving at 60 miles or 70 miles an hour, and it takes you all day just to drive that. Could you imagine having to go on foot with no resources, no money?
A foot would be like
To Alaska?
2 years.
Years. It would probably take you years. Be hard to get across the border. Like, there's just some reasonableness to it that doesn't seem right. Chapter 4.
He used to walk on foot to Alaska.
Chapter 4. I wrote Pap a letter that first night after I buried him. Dear Pap, I'm going to see Mr. Abrascato in the morning and ask him if he knows anything about getting to Alaska. See, as I'll be leaving soon, I pulled the traps tomorrow and packed them in boxes. I'm going to take your watch and sell it to Mr. Abrascato. I thought about keeping it for myself, but I don't need it. You're never much of a things person. You were never much on things a person didn't need. I'm scared, Pap. But I know I can lick almost anything 3 times my size. I know I can survive on my own and keep away from the government. I'm lonely too, Pap, but you said that would go away after a while. Doesn't seem like a feeling that goes away easy, but you always knew about things, so I'm not worried. Love, Moon. I burned the letter in the wood stove, and then I walked to the back corner of the shelter where Pap kept his personal storage. It was a metal ammunition box containing his watch and a few other things he called his valuables. It never let me see. First time he brought out the box was when Mama died. He showed me the watch and said she gave it to him when they were married. It had Mr. and Mrs. Oliver Blake, 1968, etched into the back. On my 8th birthday, I asked him about the watch again. I think it made him remember Mama, and he let me study it. He told me that one day it'd be mine. When I got the box out that night, I realized that Pap hadn't told me where the key was that opened it. I didn't want to bust it in case I damaged the watch or anything else inside there I might be able to sell. I searched under Pap's bed and up in the roots of the ceiling. I felt around the hole that led to the storage to the stage 2 area. After a while, I gave up and I sat with the box between my legs on the hide pile. Fire in the stove went out and I didn't feel like starting it again. The shelter grew cold and damp and dark. I thought I'd have nightmares if I slept, so I tried to stay awake and imagine what it would be like in Alaska. But I got so lonely that I decided nightmares were worth it, and I closed my eyes and I slept. The next morning, I woke before daylight, and I went to pick up the traps and release or throw away anything that was caught in them. There were 2 dead coons with stiff, matted hides. I pulled them from the steel jaws and tossed them into the brush because the meat was spoiled. When I returned, I packed the traps in the 2 wood boxes that were used to store them, and I stacked them beside the shelter. After watching Pap die, I found that his finally being gone had made things a little bit easier on me. I still felt a deep, lonely hole, but as much as I missed him, I could now concentrate on what he had told me to do and get started to go to Alaska. Chapter 5. I put my box on the floor of Mr. Abrascato's store and I sat on it. I was tired and breathing hard. Hey, you all right, Moon? Mr. Abrascato asked me. I nodded at the floor. You carry that box all the way from your place by yourself? I nodded again, finally catching my breath. I looked up at him. I was hoping you might want to buy the stuff in it. Hey, where's your father at? He's dead. Mr. Abrascato put his hands on the counter and leaned toward me. Dead? Yes, sir. When? yesterday. How? Well, he broke his leg and it got infected. Mr. Abbracado frowned and shook his head. Well, I guess he didn't want you coming after no doctor. No, sir. He always said it. I know what he always said. Now, you wait here until I call the constable. What's a constable? You guys know?
Government.
Close.
The cops.
Yeah, constable is another name for the police, especially in like local small areas. You might hear the word constable.
I bet you I know what happened.
You don't need to worry about that, Mr. Abbracado. I already buried him up in that cedar grove near Mama. Moon, you can't just go off burying somebody without letting the law know about it first. Pap wanted it that way. Well, your pap wanted a lot of things that don't make a lot of sense. I don't mind telling you that. Mr. Abbracado walked over to the wall and lifted the telephone receiver. I grabbed my box off the floor. You called the law, they'll take me away. I don't aim to go with them. He watched me for a moment and then put the receiver back on the hook. He shook his head and rubbed his eyes. Put that box down, he said. Get that chair behind you and pull it up here. I did as he said. What do you want to eat? He asked me. I got money for extras. I got to save it. That's all right. It's free. Bologna and cheese? Mustard? No thanks, that's all. Mr. Abbracado began to fix me a sandwich. My mouth watered as the bologna, cheese, and bread that I only saw when I came in his store. Moon, I'm sorry about your father. I didn't mean to sound like I wasn't. That's okay. He said I'd feel better after a while. Where are you headed when you leave here? Alaska? How you plan on getting to Alaska? I'm going to sell the watch and the things in this box, and I got the money left over from the last time we were here. I see. What are you going to do when you get up there? Pap said there's other people like us up there. He said you can get away from the government up there. Said you can homestead. That's what he said. Yes, sir. So that's where I figure I'll go. Mr. Abbracado handed me the sandwich and leaned on the counter watching me eat. You know how cold it is in Alaska? I chewed and shrugged my shoulders. You not worried about freezing up there? Pep said there's lots of people like us up in Alaska that I can stay with. He said there's more than ever these days. You ever thought about school, Moon? I study my books almost every night. Mr. Abbracado shook his head. That's not what I mean. With other children, Moon. Pep said he could teach me better than any school. You know how to read? Sure, I know how to read. I can whip somebody 3 times my size, too. And I know everything I need to know about living on my own. He bit his bottom lip. Uh-huh. Tell me, what kind of people are you looking for up there in Alaska? What's your father call the type of people up there that are like him? People that hate the government? And he just expects you to make it from here to Alaska and find these people on your own? I nodded. Mr. Abbracado sighed and looked out the store window, then back at me. I'm going to tell you something, Moon. Your pap was an unreasonable person. Anybody that expects a 10-year-old son to try to make it from the middle of Alabama to Alaska on just a few dollars is either crazy or plain mean. You need to go find a home with a good family that doesn't live out in God knows where on a dirt floor. I felt anger flash through my head. I jumped up on the seat of my chair. I leaped across the counter and landed on Mr. Abbracado. He fell back into the shelves behind and I started hitting him with one hand that I wasn't holding on to him. I pounded him on the cheek over and over as fast as I could. Once he got his balance, he clamped his arms around me so I couldn't move my fist. Boom! He yelled at me. I kicked him in the knee. Oh, mother mercy, he yelled. I don't mind the way we lived, I yelled at him. Pep and I always got along. Mr. Abbracado twisted me around and held me out by the shoulders so I couldn't see or kick him. Ah, God, that hurt, he said. Me and Pep were good friends, I yelled. Best friends. He held me there for what seemed like a long time. I heard him catching his breath behind me, and I stared across the store. Finally, his breathing slowed, and he talked to me. Are you going to settle down now, Moon? You stop talking about Pep like that. I'm going to turn you loose now, okay? Okay. Now, you're going to sit back on that chair now, okay? Okay. I'm going to set you down now. Okay. Mr. Abbracado put me on the counter, and I climbed back down into my chair. He ran his hand through his hair and rolled his head around his neck. He took a deep breath. Man, my age can't take somebody jumping on him like that, Moon. You can't take somebody jumping on him like a wild monkey. What's gotten into you, Moon? I picked my sandwich off the floor and I stared at it without taking a bite. I was nervous. I never acted like that to Mr. Abbracado. Well, don't talk like that about Pap, I said to the floor. Listen, Moon, I'm not trying to be disrespectful of your father. I'm trying to help you out. I'm worried about your sense of reality, Moon. I thought about what he was saying and made sure there wasn't anything I didn't like about it. Now, you don't know any better, he said. If your pap just up and dies of a broken leg because he won't see a doctor, what do you think would have happened to you if you had broken your leg, Moon? It's things like that that aren't reasonable. Refusing to see a doctor when you got the responsibility of a son to take care of. There's something wrong with that, Moon. Now he's dead and you're out walking around on the highway wanting to go to Alaska? I stood up and took a step backwards. My hands were shaking. I still didn't know what to do. Nobody's ever said anything bad about Pap, I said. Heck, who would? Who'd he ever let you see that might say it? I set the sandwich down. Are you going to give me money for this stuff or not? Mr. Abbraccato shook his head. Suit yourself. I waited while Mr. Abbraccato walked to the back of the store and got a chain cutter. My head spun in confusion. My hands still shook from being nervous. It was hard to think straight, so I walked to the front of the counter and stared at the box. When Mr. Abbraccato returned, he clipped the lock from the box and opened it. He pulled out a small roll of money, some photographs, and a watch. There was nothing else in there. There was nothing else to sell. He thumbed through the photographs and studied each one back and front. For several seconds, he finally showed one to me and asked if I knew any of the people in it. No, sir. He looked at the picture again. This fellow here looks an awful lot like your pap. I'd even say maybe it was his brother if I had to make a guess at it. You ever tell you that you had an uncle or talk about a brother or anything like that? No, sir. You ever talk about family? Said I had a grandpappy that died. Talked about mama a lot when he didn't think I was listening, when he was working on stuff and talking to himself. Maybe you got other relatives that hate the government. You might have some place to go. I just want the money for that watch there. Mr. Abbraccato raised his hand in the air. All right, he said. He opened the register, took some money from it. He put the bills, the photographs, and the watch back in the box and shut the lid. I'm not going to take that watch your pap left you. I stuck some money in there with the rest of it. That should help you out. You can pay me someday when you get back from Alaska. Thank you, sir, I said. Anything you need in the way of supplies before you get going? No, sir. I can get most everything I need from the forest. I reckon you can, Moon. I'll see you later then, I said. Hey, you be careful. I nodded. I saw Mr. Abbraccato through the store window as I walked back up the road. He had picked up the phone and was talking and watching me leave. I figured he called the law, so I tucked the box under my arm and I ran for the trees.
Mr. Houston?
Yes, sir.
I have a question